the Q&A button found at the bottom of your screen. For those on Facebook and YouTube Live, you can send in questions via chat for our admins to relay to our moderator. To start off our program, may I call on Ms. Tomasa Lipana, SharePHIL Trustee and Independent Director at SM Investments Corporations, to lead us with a prayer.
Let us put ourselves in the holy presence of our Lord. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Almighty God, we thank you for giving us good health and opportunity to be able to attend the third virtual summit of our association, the Shareholders Association of the Philippines, or SharePHIL. We humbly ask you to guide our distinguished speaker and esteemed panelists as they impart their knowledge and insights on the chosen topic for today's summit. Keep all of us participants attentive and focused as we listen to the presentations and discussions. Grant that the sharing of information and exchange of ideas this afternoon will lead to the proper implementation of the various vital legislative measures that will be discussed shortly. Enlighten the minds and touch the hearts of our government leaders so that all their thoughts, words, and deeds will be directed to the fulfillment of their duties to serve the people with utmost honesty, dedication, equity, and consistency, and in accordance with your holy will. Enable us to contribute to the rebuilding of our economy by performing our respective roles and doing our tasks in the best way we can, not only for the benefit of our companies and our self-interest, but for the common good. Make us always conscious of our responsibilities as good citizens of our country and the world, so that on the appointed time, we can honestly say we have been good stewards of your creations, and more importantly, that we have loved you by loving our neighbors. Lastly, dear Father, help the scientists and researchers to develop the right vaccines for every one of us. Heal the sick. Keep us all safe from COVID-19. And if you will, may this virus vanish from every part of the world soonest. All these petitions we ask in the mighty name of Jesus, your Son, our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Thank you, Ms. Tammy. Let's take a moment for our national anthem.
Bayang magiliw, pero sa silanganan, alak ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, tuyang ka ng magiting, sa manlulupig, di ka pa sisilig. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bugaw, may nilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kisap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagdidingding, ang bituin at araw ng kailan pa may di magdidinig. Lupa ng araw na ating pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Sa piling mo, aming di kaya dapat may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
So to formally open today's program, please welcome Chairman of SharePHIL and President and CEO of Manila Water Services, Mr. Ramoncito Fernandez.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to SharePHIL's third summit for 2020. Our government was cited for the swift passage of the Bayanihan to heal as one act. It enabled government to reallocate realign, and reprogram 275 billion of the 2020 budget, mainly to accelerate COVID testing, procurement of PPEs, and to provide emergency funds for the social and liberation program. Areas of improvement on its execution were prominently mentioned considering the lack of distribution infrastructure and systems. Government instituted one of the strictest and longest lockdowns. It enabled our health and hospital systems to prepare and expand its capacity and capability, as well as protect our limited and stressed out health workers. Meantime, our economy was badly hurt with a record 16.5% contraction in the second quarter. Congress passed a fiscally responsible economic stimulus package of 165 billion last September 11th. The objectives are strengthening the health sector, cash for work program, support for the agricultural, financial, and transport sectors, and procurement of vaccine. Some sectors say the package is insufficient, while others say, considering that there are too many unknowns, prudence is needed. Some uncertainties mentioned are the possible resurgence of the virus or the possible prolonged recovery because of permanent or semi-permanent consumer behavioral changes, as well as uncertainties related to vaccine availability and effectiveness. Some sectors have already noted the pace of Bayanihan 2 implementation. Only 6 out of the 165 billion has reportedly been released. From all indications, the 2021 national budget will be passed on time. It is everyone's hope that all these legislations will be implemented and executed efficiently and timely. Private sector is urging a dance with the virus attitude and mindset. Time to accelerate the reopening of the economy, but of course, following safety protocols. Detailed follow-through on the implementation of Bayanihan 2 and the 2021 budget is a must. Time to put into action HEAL as one with a united execution and implementation. We call all politicians to genuinely cross party lines. There is no substitute to public and private collaboration. Pursuing our purpose of investor enablement, SharePHIL is committed to continue to be a catalyst to economic recovery through its 3 pillars: educate, equip, and empower. Today's learning session is our third for this year. Our first, entitled Rise as One, had representatives Salceda, Kimbo, and Garin. Our second summit, entitled Economic Recovery, Is There Light at the End of the Tunnel, had DOF Assistant Secretary Tony Lambino as keynote representing Secretary Sani Dominguez, with panelists Dr. Shell Habito, Mr. Diwa Ginigundo, and Mr. Rome Neri. Today's summit is equally exciting. I would like to thank Senator Ralph Recto, former NEDA Secretary Ernie Pernia, former DOH Secretary Dr. Manuel Dairit, and Ms. Cherry Atilano of Agrea for lending their precious time and talent to be with us today. In behalf of SharePHIL, we welcome all of you and enjoy the summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Mon. Now, to introduce today's keynote speaker, serve as moderator for the panel discussion later, please welcome Ms. Aurora Boots Jutina Garcia, Vice President of SharePHIL, President of Mageo Consulting, and Chairperson of the Philippine Women's Economic Network, or PhilWen, and Co-Chair of the Philippine Business Coalition for Women Empowerment. Ms. Boots, you have the floor.
Thank you, Anna, and good afternoon to all our panelists as well as our guests attending through the various platforms. I have the privilege of introducing our keynote speaker today, whom of course needs no more introduction, but just the same to refresh ourselves of what he has accomplished in his tenure as public servant. Senator Ralph Gonzalez Recto is a notable public servant, educated, dedicated, and diplomatic. His devotion to family and community, unrelenting desire to make a better life for others, consummate passion for his work, and an interactive leadership style serve as the firm foundation upon which he built a reputation as a young and committed leader, whether as a legislator or a national executive. In 2008, he was named as the Director General of the National Economic Development Authority. And as NEDA Chief, Senator Ralph helped craft and monitor the government's Economic Resilience Plan, which serves as the Philippines' PAM timing program. The ERP implementation involved the front-loading of government spending during the first half of 2009 and increased spending for social services and infrastructure. Moreover, he proposed a new economic plan for the next year, initially dubbed as REAP, which stood for Reloading Economic Acceleration Plan, to protect the gains from the ERP and prepare the country for the anticipated economic rebound. He currently serves as Senate President pro tempore of the 18th Congress of the Philippines and held the same position during his last term. His long-standing political career has taken him on multiple terms in both the Senate and the House and the lower house, having been the youngest elected member in the 9th Congress of the Philippines representing the 4th District of Batangas. A deep sense of equity and fairness defined his balanced handling and scrutiny of legislative measures. In all cases, he assigns great value on the people's needs. With inclusive growth, it is expected that the poor will share the responsibility and fruits of development. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senator Ralph Recto, President pro tempore of the Senate of the Philippines. Senator Recto, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words. Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to be with you today, even though I was given 20 minutes to discuss a raft of bills, which has taken us hundreds of hours to deliberate. Imposing that cap on a politician is like asking an alcoholic to limit himself to a teaspoon of beer. First of all, allow me to thank Alex Cabrera for inviting me to today's online summit and for assisting me in my office in the many economic reform bills that we are presently faced with. I would also like to thank all of you for your active interest on bills brewing in Congress. If the Senate is taking a longer time cooking the alphabet soup of bills, create, fisc, guide, arise, and what have you, it is because legislation to be palatable must pass the Goldilocks rule, not too hot, not too cold, with the sweet spot in between. Like the combination of drugs used against COVID, our job is to concoct a cocktail of responses to the pandemic, but carefully, because the socioeconomic patient, which needs it, suffers from pre-existing comorbidities. Unfortunately, none of the bills is the legislative equivalent of a vaccine, but collectively, it will boost our resistance to the pandemic's brutal effects on lives and livelihood. Before I give you, because of time limitation, a movie trailer kind of preview on Create and Fist, let me touch briefly on three bills the Senate passed recently, which are new additions to the medicine cabinet of responses against the pandemic. Just before we adjourned, we passed the EPART. If it sounds like ERPAT, it is because the emergency powers against red tape gives Tatay Digong the power to suspend requirements for national and local permits, licenses, and certification, hopefully to speed up business activity. The bill speeds up the process and shortens the requirements for permits as he desires. It will allow the president to increase the velocity of the processing of permits. It grants him the power to set the minimum speed. But the power to accelerate does not cover the power to run roughshod over the health of the people. For example, it may expedite the construction of cell phone towers, but not one beside the Rizal Monument. We have also ratified the Medical Scholarship Bill to address the shortage of doctors the pandemic had laid bare. One of the ways of choosing scholars is to crowdsource them from the town's best and brightest and let them repay their fee, free schooling, by serving in their own community as way of directly reimbursing in kind their own people. The cost of producing one surgeon who is a future member of the Philippine Medical Association is only one-fourth the 4.3 million peso price tag of training one soldier in the Philippine Military Academy. There are other approved bills which flew under public radar or the troll's attention, whose titles are unknown, unlike the MMDA spokesman's controversial quotes. For example, we have ratified the Alternative Learning System Bill, which brings the school to those who are too old, too poor, or too far away to go to one. We have also reauthorized the Bayanihan Act, and the second edition calls for 165.2 billion in fresh aid to hospitals, families, and businesses. 30.5 billion for health, 53 billion to families and workers, and 42 billion to enterprises, the biggest of which is a 39.5 billion course through GFIs. Sadly, while Congress huffed and puffed in cobbling together this bill, the implementation seems to have sputtered. Out of the 165.2 billion, unfortunately, only 6 billion has been released. I, however, believe that the slow start can be rectified by a last quarter storm in spending. And of course, the most important in the cocktail of solutions is the national budget, for which the Senate committee hearings are nearing the finish line. We are budgeting 4.5 trillion next year, of which only 2.717 trillion can be supported by revenues, which means a deficit of 1.749 trillion will have to be bridged by borrowings. On a daily basis, this is how our budget meter ticks. 12.31 billion in expenditures. This is one bureaucracy which burns 500 million pesos every 30 minutes. However, we can only raise 7.4 billion in taxes and other revenues. This leaves a daily deficit of 4.78 billion to be plugged by those in His Majesty's debt service, who in this season of high demand but low revenues will have to pull off the fiscal equivalent of the miracle of multiplying wine out of a single jug. Speaking of wine, our alcohol-proof people, world champion drinkers in gin and brandy, have made our sin tax collections recession-proof. But not this time, as the forecast alcohol tax of 113.7 billion for 2021 is 28.4 billion lower than the 2020 projections made in 2019. Pag ang alcohol sa atay, ginawang alcohol sa kamay, ang koleksyon nadadamay. But government will be borrowing not to simply finance the deficit, but to hoard an extra 513 billion as hedge or additional cash, which brings net financing to 2.26 trillion next year and moving the national debt needle to 11.98 trillion in 2021. While the budget sports many zeros, in reality at least, two-thirds are fixed expenses. Almost 3 trillion are open to scrutiny, but not to alteration. Yung payroll, pension, and premium contributions na lang will be 1.31 trillion. About 30% of the budget or a daily payout rate of 3.6 billion. Ganyang kalaki ang personnel services expense natin. Despite this, we are confident we can carve enough budget space for critical expenses that the budget proponents missed. For example, if a proven vaccine will be rolled out next year, the kind that Trump and Putin have not haphazardly tried on themselves, and will cost $20 for 2 shots, there is no provision yet in the budget for the 55 billion to initially cover half of the population. There are other gaps in health especially, which must be filled. And this can only be filled if we will not pound plows into pork barrels. Let me now go to create. A good create must create confidence and consistency in rules at a time when the pandemic is creating confusion, company closure, corporate tentativeness, and consumer doubts. When economies are retooling and revamping their rules to avert closures and attract investors, we must not take the opposite route. Bureaucracy, they say, must be faster than the virus, and that nimbleness must extend to nurturing tax paying, job creating, poverty eradicating enterprises in the new normal of a changed business landscape. There are many takes and proposals on create. Let me put on record that my agreements with the proponent outnumber our few points of divergence. On the corporate income tax, I am proposing multiple rates based on income or based on assets. First option is based on income with 5 rates. Lowest rate at 0% for those with taxable income below 250,000 and highest rate of 25%. Second option is based on assets. 3 rates, depending if you are a micro, small, medium, or large enterprise. Lowest rate at 15% for our micro and small enterprise, which make up 99% of registered establishments. These schedules were not born in some policy sandlot. They are inspired by the Constitution, which calls for a progressive tax system. If a hardware store with a taxable earning of 1 million pays the same rate as a conglomerate which rakes in 10 billion, then this system fails the equitable rule. Adopting a progressive tax structure will assist the development of our MSMEs who comprise 99% of registered business enterprises and employ 65% of our people, who incidentally are the most affected under this pandemic. Furthermore, I have proposed that both schools and hospitals be free of tax in the next 3 years during the pandemic. On housing, I have proposed to increase the VAT exempt threshold on the sale of real properties in the case of residential lots from 1.5 to 2.5 billion, and house and lot from 2.5 million to 4.2 million. I've likewise taken the position of exempting foreign dividends from income tax. Taxing them will only discourage their repatriation. At present, the foreign exchange earnings of Philippine domestic companies distributed as dividends to a Philippine company are potentially taxed a total of 3 times. I am also in favor of removing the minimum corporate income tax, or at least suspend it for the next 3 years. Levying a minimum income tax to a company that is already operating at a net loss is not investor friendly. This is burdensome, as an investor already losing capital will still be required to pay income taxes. I've also warned against the danger of the improperly accumulated earning tax. The Supreme Court said that the tax on improper accumulation of surplus is essentially a penalty tax designed to compel corporations to distribute earnings so that the said earnings by shareholders could in turn be taxed again. But why are we penalizing a company for accumulating a legitimate income which has already been subjected to corporate income tax? This IAET is just an additional burden on the taxpayers that warrants its abolition in our tax code. On the creditable withholding tax, or CWT, Train provides for a 1% to 15% CWT rate on income payment. Under existing BIR revenue regulations, how many CWT rates are there? For purchase of goods, 1%, for services, 2%, for rentals, 5%, and professionals, including lawyers, CPA, engineers, 5, 10, and 15%. I am advocating a rate of 1% for the sale of goods and 2% for the sale of services or the exercise of profession. In addition, percentage taxes on sales below 3 million should be removed, as it also penalizes micro entrepreneurs. And before we adjourn, we tabled my proposal for 3 frameworks in treating incentives, which were products of broad consultations. I've canvassed the views of business leaders, heads of foreign chambers, some of whom I see are in this online summit, regarding the new fiscal incentives regime, which is at the core of CREATE. I've also solicited the opinion of locators who have sunk billions in projects, kept hundreds of thousands of jobs, stuck it out here rather than evacuate to Vietnam, and run real factories instead of running tabletop theoretical exercises. They're calling for fixed rules anchored in predictability and not on discretionary powers of a review board. I have proposed 3 options which provide a more granular classification, instead of putting all of them under one big roof run by a powerful big brother. Option 1 excludes IPAs from the coverage of the FIRB. These are PESA, SBMA, Clark Development Corporation, Freeport Area of Bataan, and APECO. PESA alone accounts for more than 60% of exporters, a scale it had built up over the years. Option 2 is based on the market they cater. Firms that sell domestically will enjoy fiscal incentives other than the existing income tax holiday if their industry is listed under the Strategic Investment Priority Plan. Export enterprises, on the other hand, will continue to enjoy the existing rates and set of incentives. Option 3 is the grandfather rule, which recognizes and honors the contracts held by the investors when they decided to invest in the country, which places these incentives beyond the dilution or deletion of CREATE. These 3 options may still evolve, pending the inputs of my colleagues in the Senate, It can be adopted in toto, defeated completely, or a hybrid may emerge. My work is to present an alternative other than the straitjacket championed by the executive. I would be happy to win the arguments but lose the vote than the other way around. Lastly, a quick rundown on FIST, which is the SPV law improved and rebadged. The bill will help banks and other financial institutions clean up their books of bad loans and free up their capital to maintain stability and increase liquidity in anticipation of the unprecedented increase in non-performing loans, non-performing assets due to the pandemic. One, only the private sector can participate in the establishment of financial institutions' strategic transfer corporation. It does not, however, allow foreign-owned FIS to participate in foreclosure proceedings and to take possession of land. The window of opportunity to register with the SEC is within 36 months from the law's approval. Prior notice to borrowers' NPLs is required before the transfer of NPLs to FIS shall take effect. The borrower has 90 days upon receipt of notice to restructure or renegotiate the loan. The following taxes are accepted: documentary stamp tax, capital gain tax, creditable withholding income tax, and value-added tax. I would like to end my presentation here because a minute more and it would be worthy and a windy, privileged speech. I would like to close with the exhortation. Robust legislation involves civic participation. Never allow Congress to forge laws unilaterally. You're not a mere sounding board, but a supplier of good, tested, sound, pragmatic policies. More so at a time when policymakers have the tendency to believe that because a rose smells better than a cabbage, it will make a better soup. Again, thank you very much for having me. Maraming salamat at magandang hapon sa inyong lahat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Senator. It's interesting to note that you have proposed additional bills, which I might consider friendly to, especially to the small businesses. If you will permit, would you be available for some questions that I have also formulated as well as possible questions from the floor, which might be raised? I was looking through your interviews and some news articles about quoting you, and you had earlier proposed what you actually described also as your medicine cabinet approach versus the band-aid approach. Can you elaborate further on this? And is this what we have actually adopted, or have we approached it differently in the course of all the proposed legislations that have been proposed as well as approved legislations?
Well, I think we should look at all the bills holistically and all together, not one each separately and distinct from one another. Okay? And that's what I mean by a medicine cabinet approach than just aid. No? All of them are interrelated. So, for example, the FIST and the guide bill should be looked at together. The budget for next year and the Bayanihan 1 and 2 should be looked at together. Okay? So I've always taken that position in the past and today, that we look at all of these bills simultaneously and not one or the other, because they're all interrelated.
How would you suggest, because our interest in this summit today is to make sure that the legislations that will eventually be passed will be implemented. What should the government do? How should we execute the implementation?
Well, in the first place,
aside from synchronizing them, yeah.
In the first place, we have to write them properly, that there is less room to interpret. Okay? As we all know, sometimes the implementing rules and regulations are different from the intent of the bill or the spirit of the measure. No? So that is always a challenge to us legislators, no? To write the laws properly, not subject them to many interpretations That's what I mean about that too. No, of course, implementation, and of course, today in Congress there are many oversight committees. So we call the attention of the executive when we feel that they're implementing the law different from what the law intends to do. I hope you got that.
I can't hear you. I missed the part of your statement, sir.
Yes. No, I was saying that when we write laws in Congress, we have to be as specific as possible. Okay? And write it properly so that there is less room for different interpretations following the spirit of the law. And that's why in most of these important laws, we also have oversight committees. We create them to ensure that the executive implements the law based on the spirit on which it was written. But you and I know that sometimes the executive departs from the intention of the law. Yes.
For example,
Yes. Did you get that? Can you hear me?
yeah, I was curious. Have we drafted the IRR for Bayanihan too? Has that been drafted, in fact?
You know,
Because one of the comments that has been made was that there's been slow in disbursements. You did mention 6 out of 160.
correct. In fact, in Bayanihan too, we put a provision there that it is self-executory. No need for implementing rules and regulations. Okay? But the DBM insists on, or some of the agencies insist in writing implementing rules and regulations. It will defeat the purpose of the emergency.
Exactly. I
And
think
today,
we agree.
yeah, and today, unfortunately, we were asked to prioritize Bayanihan too. We worked day and night. It was the first law passed by Congress under Zoom, under the new normal
Okay.
of legislating.
It's
The
a
first law.
milestone. Yeah.
Correct. Okay. And we passed it, I think, in August. And today, 2 months thereafter, unfortunately, only 6 billion has been released.
So what else can what else can you suggest?
Well, like I said earlier, I expect that the government, it will delay economic recovery, right? So it is the lookout of the executive. So I expect that the releases will be faster in this last quarter.
Yeah. Yeah, we're also looking forward to that because we do need to revive the economy. I'd like to ask a second question about budgets. I also did read that at some point you said that we should not scrimp on our resources, that we should in fact allocate 1 trillion, if I recall it correctly. Obviously, we're nowhere there. So how do you think that will impact our ability to recover? And as well, you also commented that more resources should be allotted to the health sector. Could you react to that, Senator?
Yes, we know that it's only government that has the balance sheet, number one, okay? And it's government that has the lowest borrowing rate or borrowing cost to begin with, no? What I propose is to spend the entire 2020 budget and have a separate budget for COVID. That way, we do not confuse the budget, okay? And what is important now, and to front load the spending. So even assuming, of course, we take cognizance of what the budget in 2021 will look like as well, no? So I've taken the approach of looking at the budget together. This year, next year, and supposedly the COVID expenses, right? Okay. So I look at it from one whole budget, no? So at the end of the day, I know our limited capacity. In effect, what I was proposing is to front line the spending, to upfront the spending.
Okay.
More
And
so today when the private sector will not spend so much, will not invest. It is only government that has the ability to do so. Yes.
so the onus is really on the government to speed up the
That's
disbursement process. Sir, aside from the legislation that's on the table, are there any other proposed legislations, even from your end or from other colleagues, that
you know
are
what I try
being
to do. Yeah.
proposed to support economic recovery?
I think that the most important will be the budget that we are discussing next year, which is about 4.5 trillion. Okay.
Mhm.
And of course, there's an opportunity to amend our tax code because of the CREATE bill. Now, in the CREATE bill, you have the reduction in corporate income taxes, which will cost us roughly about 1.5 trillion over the next 10 years. Okay? And the rationalization of fiscal incentives in one package that would have raised taxes by roughly about 2 trillion or more in the next 10 years. Okay? So we've looked at that and see what areas of the tax code can we tweak and to ensure that we do not be an Indian giver to those already who invested in the Philippines to begin with. Okay? And to come out with an incentive system, a rationalization, taking into consideration, one, that there are at least three types of investors. One who invests in the Philippines because we have a huge domestic market. Okay. The other who invests in the Philippines because of our resources. And the third, efficiency seeking. Those who invest in the Philippines to sell abroad as exporters. So our rationalization looks at all of this, and we propose different models in consideration of these issues. To track investment, yes.
Foreign investments. Okay, a final question, sir. There was a question on what does CREATE want to achieve? There's a question from the floor. What is the whole purpose of CREATE?
Yeah. Well, the first is on the corporate income side is basically the easy part, to reduce corporate income taxes to make us more competitive within the region. Okay? But essentially, that's more for the domestic economy. Okay? And by lowering taxes, we hope that we would be able to attract investments. Okay? The second part is the rationalization of fiscal incentives. Really more on attracting foreign investment, particularly export-oriented enterprises, and or those what we call strategic investments in the domestic market. Okay. Unfortunately, the way I see it, the incentives are not too enticing, and therefore our proposal is to make it a little more inviting to foreign investments to invest in the Philippines, mindful of the fact that investments next year will go down in the next 2 to 3 years in the Asia Pacific region. Okay. And I don't think you will attract investments if we increase taxes on our exporters, on our BPOs, and on foreign investors who may want to manufacture in the Philippines to sell to the rest of the world. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir. That will be my last question. And we'd like to thank you for joining us today. If you have the time, you might wish to listen to our panel members as well. Thank you, sir. And
thank you for having me. I look forward to listening to the other panel members. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Recto and Ms. Boots. Our first panelist is Professor Emeritus of the UP School of Economics and former Director General and Secretary of Socioeconomic Planning at the National Economic and Development Authority.
Okay.
Please welcome Dr. Ernesto Pernia.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this summit, Share Philippines Summit. Uh, thank you to the CEO and chair of the SharePHIL, and also to friends of mine who had invited me earlier. I think they were former officials of SharePHIL, Evelyn Singson and Cora de la Paz. And yeah, I'm pleased that I am speaking here after the talk of Senator Recto, which was very stimulating. And actually, I agreed with his incisiveness about the create bill in terms of how to make it more effective for the recovery of the economy. So the title of my presentation is Health is Economy. Actually, that is a variation of health is wealth. Health is wealth applies to the individual. But since we are talking about a public health issue now, we should really be talking about health is economy. And the reason for that is, you know, next slide, please. Who's controlling the slide? Yes. So the reason for that is actually health and economy are intimately linked, and they're also intimately interactive. Poor health is going to be bad for economic productivity, and bad economy will hurt health through livelihoods and incomes. So there's really no trade-off between the two. They are equally vital. One does not have priority over the other in terms of essence, what's called the prioritas naturae over the other, and except in timing of intervention. So prioritas ordinis. So in this pandemic, it was natural that health was attended to first, but it should have been attended to very early on, so that with the lockdown, and with the health capacity strengthened, the lockdown can be gradually eased, so that the economy can recover faster. But actually, what happened was that we started very late, and we also moved slowly, and that is why we were also conservative in spending vis-a-vis our ASEAN neighbors, South Korea and Taiwan. Next slide. So I'll talk first about Philippine economic performance and outlook. So the good and the bad. The good is, next slide. The good is what characterizes the performance of the Philippine economy between 2016 and 2019. Those are the numbers there. GDP averaging 6.6%. In fact, we were poised to become an upper middle income country this year, if not for the COVID pandemic. Headline inflation was kept within the target range of 2 to 4%. We were able to achieve the lowest unemployment rate, 5.3%, and underemployment at 14%. We also brought down poverty incidence to 16.6% in 2018 from 23.5% in 2015. We had a very healthy fiscal space, and we also kept we had the lowest national debt level at 39.6% of GDP in 2019. Highest credit rating was achieved in 2019, and we were also able to spend on infrastructure program, doubling what used to be spent in previous administrations over the last 5 years and earlier. Next slide. Okay, the bad is that everybody knows what happened in the first quarter. The economy started to plummet, and worse, the plummeting deepened in the second quarter. So we are averaging in the first semester negative 9.9% growth, and we are likely the earliest to get back to pre-COVID growth rate by 2022. We have several. There are several forecasts on the growth of the Philippine economy in 2020 and 2021. So you can see that the worst forecast is by the Institute of International Finance for this year, negative 7.5%. IMF is even more negative at 8.3%. And then, all these institutions agree that there will be a rebound in 2021, but it's not going to bring us back to what was our economic level pre-COVID, because there'll still be a deficit of some 1 percentage point, maybe, or a quarter of a percentage point by 2021. So that, as I've said earlier, likely normalization of growth will be 2022. Philippine government is a bit more optimistic about the forecast for the whole of 2020. It's between negative 4.5 to negative 6.6%, and in 2021 bouncing back to 6.5 to 7.5%. Next slide, please. Well, the sorry story is that the Philippines is getting this reputation of having the highest COVID-19 caseload in this part of Asia and the slowest economy to recover. And this can be attributed to differences in both health system capacity that is in place currently, and the government's COVID spending, COVID response spending. As regards the health system capacity, the Philippines' health infrastructure appears to be the weakest in ASEAN, as reflected by this highest caseload, COVID caseload, despite the world's longest continuous lockdown. Regarding government spending on COVID, next table, please. Next slide. This is these are comparative COVID spending by ASEAN countries, and you can see that we are really at the bottom. We are only spending 5.8% of GDP, compared with Vietnam, which is the next lowest. But Vietnam is still at a lower per capita income than the Philippines, but it's spending double what we are spending as a percentage of GDP. And Indonesia also double, Malaysia even much higher, and Thailand 3 times our spending. Singapore, of course, is a sui generis country. And in terms of per capita spending, those are the numbers there on the third column. Again, so in all 3 numbers, in terms of the aggregate amount of spending, as percentage to GDP and per capita spending, we are at the bottom in ASEAN. So I think this is quite telling in terms of having been able to address our health system capacity as well as our ability to recover compared with other ASEAN countries. Next slide. And then these are the comparative deficits and debts in ASEAN. And you can see that we are pretty, we're doing pretty well in terms of of both deficit, budget deficit, and debt. We are actually in the middle of the pack in terms of budget deficit. It's only 3.3%, and then our debt level is below 40% in 2019. This is before the pandemic, of course. Next slide. The next slide shows that the ratings by these different ratings agencies, Fitch, Moody's, and S&P. And you can see that we're also around the middle, BBB to BBB plus, that is our rating. Singapore is sui generis again. Malaysia is also doing very well in terms of credit rating, despite the very high spending by Malaysia. And Singapore is also spending very high, but they were able to keep their very impressive credit rating. Thailand, the same thing. Vietnam is at the bottom, and we are really around between Indonesia and Malaysia or Thailand in terms of the credit rating. So what you can see here is that we have been spending for COVID response lowest level among ASEAN countries. The other countries, they have been spending a lot more, but they did not suffer in terms of credit rating downgrade. Next slide. The implication here, there are policy implications here. Tables 2 and 3 suggest that despite sharply ramping up COVID spending in 2020, the five countries other than the Philippines maintained the respectable credit ratings based on 2019 debts and deficits and debts. And then this implies that credit rating agencies may have adjusted their norms for assessment given the pandemic. So it also implies, it's a policy implication, that the Philippines could markedly ramp up its COVID response spending and still keep its credit ratings. So there is no fear that we may be downgraded, because the other countries were not downgraded. None of them were downgraded. So in terms of increased spending, I would suggest in my consultations with other economists in LaSalle, Ateneo and UP, they should include investments to fortify the health system capacity. That should be the priority, because that is really the weakest link in our economy and the health system. Raise the remuneration of healthcare personnel so that they do not leave the country, and build or improve social infrastructure, meaning hospitals and health centers, extending to the provinces. And I think I'm happy with the bill of Senator Villanueva about medical scholarships. So every province, or maybe at least every region, should have a PGH for Philippine General Hospital, not necessarily from UP only, but also LaSalle has hospitals, and Ateneo, I think, also has hospitals related to the university. So spending in these areas of concern are long overdue, will magnify the impact of other economic stimulus, such as physical infrastructure, roads and airports and railways, to include digital connectivity. This is also very important, digital connectivity, social amelioration program, and assistance for distressed SMSEs and unemployed workers. Actually, most of these areas of concern are covered by the accelerated recovery in an investment stimulus for the economy, which the budget for that over 3 years is 1.3 trillion, which is really going to ramp up our spending on this pandemic and also for the recovery of the economy. I think it deserves passage as much as or even more urgently than the create. And the reason for that is the areas covered by the arise are really more urgent, more short term in terms of urgency. And so next slide. Well, the next slide, I just mentioned the create, which was exhaustively discussed by Senator Recto, and as I mentioned earlier, I agree with his dissection of the create bill, and then the fist also is something that is worth passage. But I think we need to give priority to the arise because they address it's a demand stimulus. The thing about the create is it's more a supply stimulus. What we need now is demand stimulus because that is the Keynesian approach when we are in a recession. The supply stimulus, which is the main thrust of the create, is more long term. In other words, it's something that can be done after the arise or maybe simultaneously, and so that is where I'd like to end my presentation. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for that, Dr. Pernia. Next up, we have Ms. Cherry Atilano, founding farmer and CEO of Agrea Agricultural System International. She's a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader and recently appointed by the Department of Agriculture as Ambassador of Food Security. Cherry, you're
Yes. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you.
Yes, okay. I will, thank you so much, Senator Recto, and thank you so much also for a macroeconomics view of the country, former Secretary Pernia. And right now, I'm here to actually talk about the situation of our farmers. And so my first slide, Philippine population right now is around 109 million people with 1.45% growth rate from 2015 to 2030. And in 2030, 10 years from now, we have 123.6 million people. And I'm sharing you this, it's because I want to connect how these consumers of 109 million connects to our food producers. Right now, our food producers, our Filipino farmers, including our fishers, are poor, aging, and with low educational attainment. I always believe in this proverb. It says that when the farmer is poor, so is the whole country. I guess that's explanation why our country is poor because we really forgot our agriculture sector. It's been a while, and our farmers are actually suffering because of that, and also our consumers. I hear this from Secretary William Dar. He was actually interviewed like end of March. He said that the threat of hunger is as real as the threat of COVID-19. And I saw this picture in one of our visits in the communities. We actually bring fresh food packs, in partnership with local government units during the early days of the lockdown or the quarantine. I saw this one painted by some people, in those areas. Patay na sa gutom, di sa COVID-19. So the threat of hunger is really real than the threat of the pandemic. And during this September 17 to 20, the SWS survey says that 7.6 million families reportedly have involuntary hunger or hunger due to lack of food in households amid the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And, this is actually a very real and a very sad problem, because right now, malnutrition is doubled in number. Hunger in the Philippines also doubled in number. Um, as you know, I'm a UN ambassador for scaling up nutrition movement, right? And I always believe that malnutrition is both a human rights and an economic rights. If we allow this hunger and malnutrition and involuntary hunger to exist, we will have a generation of malnourished people. Our human capital will be poor, and our country will be run by, malnourished brains. And I'm so afraid of what will happen for the next generation. And however, though, during this COVID-19 pandemic, the Filipino farmers did not fail us during this COVID-19. I was a witness of that. Together with my company, Agrea, we actually launched the Move Food Initiative movement. And for that, we helped more than 20,000 farmers in the Philippines who lost their markets, and bring it to a new market. So through digital platform, we brought them to more than 80,000 families in Metro Manila. We engaged with several companies, corporate social responsibilities, and most importantly, we engaged with local government units. Filipino farmers and fisher folk took up the challenge of providing every family with accessible, healthy, and affordable food during the lockdowns. So hopefully, why I'm saying this, I'm just stressing and a reminder for everyone that if the Filipino farmers became the frontliners, hopefully we will become frontliners to support them continuously towards how we bounce back as a country. In SharePHIL's last webinar, actually, I was so inspired by the statement of Dr. Shelito Javito. He said that if you want to bounce back our country, agriculture is the easiest and the fastest. It's because a lot of industries, services, even manufacturing are actually dependent to agriculture. And this picture from one of the farms, we were working with, they put this up on their fields. Labanan ng COVID, bigyan ng sapat na suporta ang magsasaka. And for me, working with farmers for 22 years of my life, since I was 12, this is always something that I will always, speak up on their behalf. So during this pandemic also, despite the lockdowns and a lot of reduced activities, the agriculture sector managed to grow by 1.6%. It's the only positive result that is good, actually, despite the pandemic. And during this Bayanihan Act 2, it says that out of 164 billion allocations of the government, 24 billion will be allocated for the farmers. And hopefully, this will go straight to our farmers. And I'm really wishing for that. A lot of farmer cooperatives we work are still waiting for this to happen. And, during this pandemic, it says like, oh, there's no food security in the Philippines. There's no much food present in the market. Actually, there is food. Because of the closure of restaurants, the closure of hotels, there are so much food present in wet markets and in supermarket. The problem is people don't have money to buy food. So I'm going to the next, part of my presentation, because I'm also part of the Women Business Council. One of the problem actually is a lot of people lost their jobs, right? In this news alone, Philippines with most business closure, layoffs versus peer during pandemic. And there was an ADB study that shows that over 70% of Philippine MSMEs had cash flow problems, forcing owners to borrow from friends and family to keep their business afloat. But this statement was actually last April. So during April also, we heard in the news that we have around 7.3 million Filipinos are jobless. And another statement in July, when we kind of reopened our economy, it went down to 4.6 million jobless Filipinos. So I want to go back to my statement. There is food, but actually there's no money to buy food. And right now, I guess, from April situation to now it's October and hitting November and going December, MSMEs have now reached the end of the line. Before, they used to borrow money from friends and family, but those friends and family have no money also. And they're also trying to keep themselves afloat or their businesses afloat altogether. So, sabi nga nila, sariling diskarte, the heavy impact of lockdown on micro small businesses. It actually brought to a lot of stores coming from the kitchen, a lot of products coming from a cottage type of industry. I've noticed in our village here in Makati, my neighbor now is like the best, baker of cake. The best maker of ube pandesal. So it became common. And micro enterprises make up 88.5% businesses in the country. And this one actually provides so much employment. So for this one, based on my experience, hopefully the government will fast track on how to implement this packages, the economic stimulus packages for MSMEs to bounce back, promote a shift to digital transactions. Hopefully this is supported because a lot of transactions now are just being done online. If you notice, you have Facebook group, you have Viber group, you have WhatsApp group. When you go to these groups, it become a digital transaction as a market. Design evidence-based policies, especially on taxes, loans, and investment opportunities. So this one, hopefully our taxes, especially with the MSME. And lastly, assist the transition to work from home to avoid layoffs and eventually closure of businesses. So this is actually something that is very bad to see for the last 7 months. I heard so many friends and even families closing businesses left and right and sending off their labor force because they don't have money anymore to maintain. So I want to do some recommendations aside from the 5 points I mentioned a while ago. This is related to our work in the agriculture sector. So unlock investments to farmers. I know, there's this money, 24 billion support to farmers, but it's not enough. We really need to invest our agriculture sector if we want to bounce back faster. Investment to women, MSME, especially in the food processing and supply chain. You see in these photos, these are women in Benguet during the harvest of tomatoes last April and May. There were tons and tons of tomatoes dropped on the road because they would rather throw them than selling them because the logistics so hard and there are no potential market anymore. So what happened to these women? They turned these tomatoes into jam and a lot of other products that are tomato based. So hopefully we will continue unlocking potential on women MSME. Second one, in the other picture, this is in our farm in Marinduque Island. This is one of our farmer leader, and she's a woman. She's very powerful. I'm always a strong believer that every investment in a woman in a farming community is an investment to the entire community. This woman actually employs around 57 other women and youth around her to help even in the turmeric production during harvesting and sorting and processing. And lastly is support to digitization. I encountered a lot of problems during this COVID-19 that I became a seller of all this MSME because Agria somehow knows how to sell it in Facebook or knows how to sell it online. So we became like a seller to help all this MSME. But hopefully, we can help them to prosper in digitization. Another one is the Plant program. It needs to be both rural and urban in terms of gardening. This is also an example. So I'm always walking the talk. I always believe in walking the talk. This is one of our projects with Corteva AgriScience, ANZ Bank, MVP Group of Companies, or Metro Pacific Foundation, where they actually, got grow kits from us. The grow kits are grown by our farmers in Lucban, Quezon. And these grow kits went to almost 1,000 families in the urban areas and to some relocation sites in Laguna, Cavite, and Bulacan. So we will focus on more localized value chain, grow your own food. If you're listening right now, we've been focusing on hashtag Plantdemic, not only focusing on planting ornamentals in your house, but please start growing your own food. We can bounce back better. In my next few slides, I have some recommendations on how to bounce back better by supporting the agriculture sector. So one, a pro-Filipino farmer approach. I emphasize Filipino farmer, please. I know the country is still not producing enough, but we need to demand ourselves with so much excellence on how to actually help our Filipino farmer first. Second one, supporting local growers to all the consumers. Please support our local growers because as I speak, I received so many requests of rotting fruits in Davao and in Mindanao right now, and a lot of fruits coming in and vegetables coming in from the Cordillera region. Investments to farmers. So I think the government has programs under the Agriculture Credit, ACPC Policy Council. Especially, they just launched the Agri-Pinay. So these are investments for women in agriculture and food supply chain. Number four, increased productivity and competitiveness. It means we really need to invest in the productivity of our farms, mechanization in a more sustainable way. And lastly, climate resilient cropping system, diversify and mechanize in a more sustainable way. I want to emphasize the climate resilient cropping system. I'm just praying that there will be no big storm coming in, or else it's another disaster in the agriculture sector. From opening this 2020 with volcanic eruption affected thousands of farmers, to COVID-19, to right now, hopefully there's no typhoon. But salute our farmers, they actually still delivered. And lastly, one of my recommendations is research for development. I grew up hearing research in development. Hopefully, research for development. Why are we researching for? What kind of rice variety are we really fighting for? Are we really investing our money for? What kind of corn variety that we're going? Is it for just, for just profit? But hopefully it's for the development of everyone. And lastly, I still strongly believe that the most essential business is feeding people. During this pandemic, I never heard of everyone panicking, going to the shop and buying new shoes, buying new clothes, buying new car. Everyone went to the supermarket to hoard food. And another also one is include and invest in the youth to go into agribusiness. This is very, very important because I noticed during this pandemic, a lot of youth actually are out. They are the ones driving the truck when no one is driving. They take care of the supply chain. They went to the farmer cooperatives and talked to the farmers because their age is below 60 years old. You know, we work a lot with people who are 20 to 35 years old during this pandemic. And look at this. These are my team. Mostly we're composed of young women who are actually really working on our fields to help our farmers. And hopefully with investment in the agriculture, in youth in agriculture, this is the answer to my second slide, the aging farmers in the Philippines, right? With the inclusion of the youth, we can help develop the agri-tech sector of our country. Social enterprises and value addition, I observe a lot of people actually develop products out of the produce of the farmers. Supply chain and logistics, it's something that is so broken. And during this pandemic, it was, the worst situation. Farm management, we need to intensify our farm management and consolidation because of the smallholder farmers. If you want to connect them on a larger scale, consolidation is very important. And lastly, research and farm tourism. I mention here farm tourism because bouncing also our tourism industry. Believe that farm tourism is one thing that we can bounce back faster. People are in an open space, in a healthy environment under the sun, green, and also eating healthy. So economic reset, transforming our food systems, resilient food supply chains, hopefully, healthy diets. Our next speaker is Dr. Manuel Dairet, so he can expand to this further. I really want to promote regenerative farming on how to actually bring back the health of our soil in the Philippines, which is actually one of the reasons why our farmers are producing very little, and conservation and innovation. And lastly, I really want to remind everyone, both the government, other private sector, my colleagues, and also our academe. Let's develop something that is for farmers and always considering farmers as a center and core of our change. Because if they did not leave us during this pandemic, they became frontliners. Hopefully, we will continue supporting them for them to become frontliners on our daily lives. So, thank you so much in this very short presentation. Most things except agriculture can wait. Maraming salamat po.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Atelano. Finally, we have former Dean of the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health, and he also served as Secretary of the Department of Health during which the SARS outbreak occurred. So here to share his views on public health and policy, please welcome Dr. Manuel Daire.
Good afternoon, friends. After listening to the talk of Senator Recto and Secretary Pernia and Cherry, I've decided to shorten my talk and go straight to the point. A lot has been said about economic policy, about agricultural policy. What I'm going to try to do in my talk, which I'll share very shortly, is to focus on the implementation. Because essentially, it's going to be the implementation against COVID-19 that's going to enable us to open the economy effectively. So if I share my screen now. So I've titled my talk, Opening the Economy Safely. And essentially, this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to vary it a bit. But really my main message here is that if we're going to open the economy safely, we have to be able to continue to enable our health pandemic control, as well as capacitate our health services. As I will show you, the country was never really prepared to face COVID-19, not by a long shot. We were able to control SARS. It was a different virus. I think we were able to jump the gun on SARS at the time in 2003. But this time, that was not the case. And I will show you very quickly, this is the story of our epidemic. Okay. If you start on March 15, where we had 100 cases, in fact, the epidemic started earlier, as early as January, and our first cases happened in January 30. But by March 15, the day that we started our lockdown, we already had 100 cases. And as you can see, we had a very sharp trajectory. Just follow my cursor. And within 3 weeks, we were able to bend the curve. That was by mid-April, early April. But when you look at how that curve has sloped upwards, we ended ECQ on May 31st, 77 days later. And by that time, we had 15,000 cases. But by August 4, when we called for a timeout, we had already 112,000 cases. This is the story of our health system, this upwardly sloping curve. And this is the curve that tells you that our health system was in no way prepared to encounter this epidemic. And we had to build capacity through the course of this time rapidly. So the rising slope tells you that story. This is now as of October 18, but you can see that we had positivity rates of as high as 10%. And we'd like to have positivity rates only of about less than 5%. And you can see that by the color of the graph. And you can see on the right-hand curve there what the positivity rates are. But note over here is you can see that if you were to extend this line, it would have been a steeper curve. So over the last 8 to 9 weeks, our cases have actually been falling. But the whole idea is to bend this curve towards the horizontal. And this is a logarithmic curve, okay? We need to bend that towards the horizontal. Here we're averaging 2,500 to 3,500 cases a day. And if you compare that to Thailand, Vietnam, and Taiwan, this is what I mean by bending it towards the horizontal. Here, they have very, very few cases, in fact, almost negligible, compared to our upward sloping curve. And that is the story of really 30 years of underinvestment in health. That's our story. 30 years of underinvestment in health, and all of the different reforms that happened, including the implementation of the local government code, that has resulted in the status of our health system. And therefore, you can see that Thailand, Vietnam, and Taiwan, which had invested in healthcare much than we did over the last 25 to 30 years, they were able to bend their curve rapidly. You can see that they actually had a quick rise, but they bent it because their system was able to do it. Vietnam and Taiwan were quite wary of China, and when they got wind that the epidemic was happening in China, they closed their borders and did not allow any new cases to come in. So that essentially is our story. And the question is now, really, with our slope at this level, can we open the economy? Do we have a choice? Very briefly, this is how it looks over the last few months. But this is what I want to point out. The green bars are Metro Manila. The blue bars are Region 7, Cebu. The gray bars are Region 4A, that's Calabarzon, and then this is the rest of the country. This is to show you, DOH data is showing that we are bending the curve, and Metro Manila has actually negative growth rates, and I'll show you figures on that. So this is a good time to open the economy, but it doesn't mean that we're there already. It means that we're at a period that for some reason, because of interventions in Metro Manila, and because probably the epidemic is more mature here, we are beginning to slow negative growth rate of new cases. But it could spike anytime, and therefore we cannot be complacent. So I will go very quickly to this. What has been the challenge of fighting COVID-19? And these are implementational challenges. Senator Recto mentioned that, they legislate, but you still have to implement. Very early on, we had to get clarity in governance. DOH couldn't do it. And therefore, President Duterte had to revise the command structure. We were playing a snakes and ladders game, if you know that game. And I will show you that really, with so many snakes, we couldn't advance our pandemic control measures. Our data management was poor, delayed, incomplete. It's now improved and improving. Human resources, shortages everywhere, particularly now in the provinces where the epidemic is growing. You know about our PhilHealth woes. Communicating to the public has been a problem, and of course, restoring public confidence, reviving the economy, opening public transport. These are all implementational issues. So what lessons have we learned? We can do our lockdowns, but we will not be able to suppress it. The infection is just too widespread. But we can continue to improve our pandemic functions, and really, we can be proud of what we've achieved, given where we started. We are improving our data, and I will show you that later, that we actually have data all the way down to the municipal level. But this is something that we still need to do. Government has to communicate much better. And when I say government, I mean that's national government, local government, they have to sing the same tune. People get confused. We have to keep positive because we have to live with the trade-offs. And of course, we have to plan ahead, particularly for the vaccine. And this is a long-term goal. We have to invest in our public health system going forward over the next 20 years. So where are we now? NCR is showing negative growth rates in the last 8 to 9 weeks, but the epidemic is spreading in NCR. So we need to continue to build health system capacity in LGUs. Many of these LGUs don't even have a surveillance unit. Government and private sector need to build consumer confidence, which is low at the moment, and that's going to take time. And of course, there's the Bayanihan 2 law. And one of my charges in this talk was to say, is the Bayanihan 2 law going to help us? And this is, you can see, the main message I said was that whatever we do, we have to be able to continue to capacitate our pandemic control functions as well as build capacity everywhere, including at local governments. And if you look at these items, they go for funding health workers, contact tracers, quarantine facilities, personal protective equipment, testings and vaccines. These are all important. But you can see that if the money doesn't flow, you could be running out of personal protective equipment by next year. And without a vaccine, we're back to square one. So this is really the imperative of the Bayanihan 2 law. I mean, it's there, there's budget cover, but can we actually amend it? This is the snakes and ladders that I was talking about. Note, on the right-hand side are all of the systems that we have to build, all at the same time. We cannot build one and neglect the other. For example, you can build your testing capacity, but if you don't have isolation facilities, you're going to go snake down and drop down. If you don't have good contact tracers, you're going to be set back. And really, we have built very good testing capacity, but our contact tracing or isolation lags behind. And I'll show you here. A great phenomenal achievement of government and working with the private sector. Look at that spike in cases. This would not have happened on an ordinary day, okay, or an ordinary year. We went from one lab in February to 137 labs today. That is phenomenal. We're doing testing of about 30,000 a day, up from a few thousand in March and April. But note isolation of positives, and this is by municipalities. Percentage of quarantine positive individuals put on quarantine, look at the percentages here, 20, 30%, which means we're testing, we're identifying positives, but they're not getting isolated. So how do we open the economy? These are implementational issues. One, coherent policies, budget, and implementation. I don't need to explain that. Everyone needs to practice minimum health standards. Everyone, and I mean everyone, including the ordinary citizen. And they have to practice it everywhere, in public spaces, workplaces, and homes, which means and why to practice minimum health standards. And that's where the communication comes in. Understand that if they're going to travel in public transport where you've increased capacity, that, of wearing masks, wearing face shields, no talking, no eating, ventilation, and so on and so forth. And because the rubber meets the road with the LGUs, these are the goals that the LGUs will have to implement. Two goals. Keep your new cases at less than or equal to 7 per 100,000 population, and I'll explain that later, per day. And keep your 2-week growth rate at 0 or less than 0. If our LGUs do that, we'll be in good shape. And I mean most LGUs. Institutions and businesses have to support these goals because, for example, it's in the workplaces that you can have transmission. We have to maintain our surge capacity for critical care beds at the level of less than or equal to 70% occupancy, that we have some surge room because cases are going to come when you open up the economy. And in due course, we have to provide safe and effective vaccines. This is what we need to do. I mean, if we were to be able to do this in the next few months, I think we'd be okay. Public transport. This is where the trains are running. Until last week, they said we could go to 30% or 50%. Because what was happening? We were keeping capacity in the trains very, very loose. And then outside, they were not practicing less than 1 meter. They were not practicing 1 meter distancing. So the irony of ironies. These are the 7 commandments. And all of these are scientifically shown. And I don't want to go into all of that because it's very, very involved. But this is the journal article that actually supports that. That if you combine masks, face shields, even if you decrease social distancing, you would still get the protection of 1 meter distancing or more. This is what I was talking about. Look at this column. All of the cities and municipality of NCR, their population and their latest cases as of September 24, okay? Note, Pateros had 12 cases per 100,000. Quezon City had 4 cases per 100,000, although Quezon City had 147 cases that day. But because of 3.1 million population, it reduces to 4 or 4.6 cases per 100,000. The goal is for every LGU to bring it down to 7 or less. That's the goal. And you can see that's not going to be easy. If you're doing 12, 15 per 100,000, you'll have to reduce it to less than 7. And the goal is to reduce it up to 0 if you can. And at the same time, reduce your 2-week growth rate to less than 0. And look at this. At this time, you can see that the cities and province and municipalities of Metro Manila had actually negative growth rates, meaning to say they had cases, but over a 2-week period, if you were to compare them, the cases in the earlier 2-week period were more than in the succeeding 2-week period. This is an example of that. Quezon City, note, they've dropped down from minus 19. If you compare the 2-week growth rate from September 7 to September 20, that 2 period, to September 21 to October 4. So you're comparing two time periods here. And you can see that Quezon City has falling growth rates. So is City of Manila. And so is Caloocan. This is a good sign for NCR at this time. You even have data as far as the municipalities of Pasig, Parañaque, and Calamba. And this is just a sample. This is Mangan in the city of Pasig, where they showed a negative 25 growth rate. Tambo in Parañaque, a minus 56 growth rate, and Canlubang, a minus 29% growth rate. This is the good news, okay? But you can see here in Region 6 where they did a 1-week growth rate, comparing September 14, September 20 to September 21 to September 27. Look, it's only Aklan here that is a negative growth rate. And Negros Occidental, where Bacolod is. The rest have positive growth rates. Although you can see that their cases are far fewer, and the next slide will show that. This is Aklan. Look, their cases are at the level of about 5, okay? And therefore, Aklan, I know last week, drove down to 1 in order to get a growth rate like this. And they were keeping their hospital bed capacity at 6.5%, meaning to say they had huge surge capacity in case they had an outbreak. And this is, look at their data. They have a testing capacity, they have a population, and this is what every LGU has to do. And this has to be across the country if you're going to open up the economy safely. Build surge capacity, critical beds. This is an example of NCR, East Avenue. And this is close to the last slide. Note, this is the way we're structured. IATF policy, operations, national task force, national incident command. Then you have 2 clusters now. the DOH cluster for operations, and the NEDA cluster for economic recovery. Then you have all of the regions here, the task forces in the regions, and the LGUs. You know, when you look at this slide, it's very, very top heavy. It's as if national government were the key. Well, this is where policy is done, but the keys are down here. It's what the LGUs do. And that's what needs to be supported. That's what Bayanihan 2 will need to support. You need to capacitate the LGUs in order for them to manage the epidemic at their level. That's the name of the game. Otherwise, all of the laws, all of the policies that are talked about here in Metro Manila, in the House of Senate and the Congress, they will all come to naught. My final slide, aspirations towards next year. Hopefully, if we can flatten the curve, as I showed you, and as we scale up, assuming that we have the budgets also for scaling up, we'll do better. Hopefully, the economy opens up by 75%, and that by next year we have an effective vaccine, and that we can deliver it. And again, this is budget dependent. Thank you very much, and good day to everyone.
Thank you to all the panelists.
Thank you, Dr. Dairit.
We
Can
will
we
now
have all the speakers on screen for the panel discussion? Turn on your video. Senator Recto, Dr. Dairit.
Yeah.
Are we on screen now, Anna? Oh,
Yes, ma'am. I will just pin your videos.
Saying, sir. Maybe I can start off. There was a question. There's a person, one of our trustees, who wanted to ask a question of Senator Ralph. Is Tami Lipana still around?
Yes.
Yes, please
I'm
go
here.
ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Senator.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. I appreciate the very noble objective of your proposal to have graduated corporate income tax rates in order to help the small businesses or the MSMEs. I noted, however, that with your proposal, there will be a great disparity between the graduated income tax rates applicable to individuals engaged in businesses that are not incorporated. I mean, they are operating under a sole proprietorship scheme. Okay? And I believe that there's still a large number of small enterprises operating as a sole proprietor. The other one is, and I think this is understandable because if you incorporate, there are more requirements that need to be complied with. The other one is with respect to the proposal to repeal the 3% tax. I appreciate that as well. But right now, individuals engaged in business or in the exercise of profession may opt to pay 8% tax based on gross sales or receipts. And that is in lieu of the graduated income tax rate and the 3% tax. So what will happen? Will there be a review of this 8% tax being imposed or being allowed to be applied by the individuals for simplicity purposes? And also the apparent disparity which I pointed out. Because, for example, Mr. Senator, for
one by one. If I can.
Okay.
Tami, can we have the senator answer the first question first?
Okay. Well, let's start with the 8%. That
Yes,
continues.
sir.
You have a choice.
Except that would be simply for in lieu of income tax. No,
That is
because the
correct.
3% will be repealed.
That's
So
correct.
there's no plan to review that 8% tax. I mean to reduce
Not
that.
at the moment.
There's no one. Okay.
You can choose that too. You can also use OSD.
Oh yeah, there is OSD.
Correct.
Okay, but yes, I understand that.
Do you
Okay.
have one or two more questions?
Yeah, just the other one. It's the disparity between the income tax rate imposed on individuals engaged in business and on corporations because of the proposed graduated income tax on graduated corporate income tax. For example, Mr. Senator, on an income of 2 million, if you are an individual, the tax is 490,000. If you're a corporation, the tax will be 235,000 only.
Yes,
And yeah,
yes, yeah, we're mindful of that. That took also into consideration the basically the dividend tax of 10%.
Okay.
okay.
So, Tami, is that the last question for the senator?
Yes,
Open to
yeah. I have, but
comments.
then
Yeah.
that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Senator.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Senator Ralph. I have a few questions for the panel, so I'll go in the order that they made their presentation. First, for Secretary Pernia, I've read a lot of in a number of instances of the role that you see for the private sector in this recovery program. Can you elaborate more on this? How do you see the private sector supporting economic recovery, and what sort of structure would you suggest? Because I recall that in one interview, you even suggested that Secretary Galvez could have been supported by a representative from the private sector as he was implementing the recovery initiatives.
Yes,
Would you?
essentially, there's really need for more partnership and understanding between the public and the private sector. And not only in terms of projects, public-private partnership projects, but also even in terms of our response to the COVID. Remember that spontaneously, the private sector was quite quick to respond to the upsurge in the pandemic or the outbreak of the pandemic, along with Caritas Manila and other NGOs. They contributed a lot, not only supplies, PPEs, but they also were very active in expanding the quarantine facilities, testing centers, and many of them, about 270 firms were very active in the response to the pandemic without being even having been asked by the government. They just did it on their own. And what I'm saying is that better coordination between the public and the private sector in terms of activities like this, not only in terms of public-private partnership infrastructure projects, would be more impactful in terms of the outcome, in terms of the effect on the whole effect of the cooperation. So we are not, sometimes the government is adversarial vis-a-vis the private sector, which is not good. I think there should be more amicable relationship and understanding. But of course, it should be arm's length so that there is no, hanky-panky between the two in terms of corruption.
Would you suggest that in the organization structure that was presented by Dr. Darid, that there should be a role for private sector?
Oh yes, for example, the IATF. I was a member of that. I attended a couple of meetings, but there are too many government bureaucrats there, and also from the military. I think there should be private sector participants who can provide the private sector perspective in terms of the economy, in terms of what's good, balancing between lockdown, for example, versus economic recovery. So that would be more beneficial than just government doing it alone, which it cannot do really. The government cannot do it alone, and that is why it is now strict. It's having problems with spending. But as I've said, the government, even in spending, we really have capacity. We have a headroom for spending because we have a low debt to GDP ratio, low deficit. I mean, Thailand and Malaysia and all these other countries, they really raise their spending. So, for example, we only spend about 5% of GDP. We could raise that easily to 10% like Vietnam. And then that would mean another trillion pesos spending for COVID response. And that would have been that would have had more impact on the on both the health system and as well as the capacity of the economy to recover.
Thank you.
That is what happened in Vietnam and Thailand, and Taiwan. They all spent enough. They were not conservative about spending, and they were not worried about credit ratings.
Mhm.
Because credit ratings really can be worried about later. I mean that's a concern that is of a secondary priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I'd like to turn now to Cherry. Cherry, you did a pretty good job of mobilizing the agricultural sector in terms of bringing supply to the market. As you said, this was all sariling diskarte. Did government play any role in this? And if not, how could the government have supported you? And what could the government do more in the future in terms of implementing similar programs?
Thank you very much, Ms. Boots, for that question. Of course, we easily pivoted our business because we're group of like young people who are actually very active in mobilizing the agriculture sector. But in the first 3 days of the lockdown, after we pivoted our business immediately, so agile to address the need of the farmers, um, we were encountering a lot of problems on the ground. Like, for example, the Department of Agriculture lockdown, the quarantine, and the DILG, they're misaligned. We got, like, for example, we work with different LGUs, including nonprofit like Philippine Business for Social Progress, Caritas, and all those groups. Immediately in 3 days, we got an order of 12 tons of vegetables to be delivered to their constituents. The moment we got to our farmers, the farmers are not allowed by their barangays to even get out of their house. So who will harvest 12 tons? So what happened to that? I wrote a letter to the Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary William Dar, and addressed the Undersecretary for Operations that these are the problems on the ground. People in Manila are running out of food, and the farmers are having produce rotting on their fields. So when you go to the farmers are not allowed to get out of their house. There's a misalignment of, maybe you can discuss it with the ALG on how to discuss on the barangay level to allow the farmers to go out. Second one, I think cash is king or cash is queen. When we went to the fields, there are so many traders also coming in, and it was so difficult. They bring, cash to the farmers and they pay immediately to the farmers. So I also, shared all the feedback to the government. And lastly, the supply chain. My goodness, there was no present logistics provider. So what we did is we needed to talk to barangay captains, to borrow trucks to help the farmers. We needed to talk to some private sectors, our friends who are located where the farms are, to borrow trucks from them. And the problem also is, if you can find a truck, no one is even willing to drive a truck because where are you going? Oh, we're going to Manila. Oh, we're afraid of the virus. The stigma of the virus is so deep that even all of them don't want to drive a truck to bring. But nevertheless, I wrote around 8 points: problems on the ground and problems on finance support of farmers and logistics, and I sent it to the office of the Secretary of Agriculture. And the following day, the secretary somehow addressed it. He immediately released an advisory addressing to Secretary Anyo on how to help the farming sector reopen somehow. Just, follow the protocol on wearing masks or physical distancing. And another one is support on logistics. I actually became part of the food security task force representing the private sector. So we got we actually, help on the food pass. The release of the food pass, that if your truck are carrying produce from the farmers, you can do your business. And of course, the financing part is still the delay until now. There are financing, but then it's still part of the Bayanihan Act 2. And somehow this is actually stressing a lot because this is planting season again, and the farmers are waiting for that one. I think I must advise that for private sector, the government for sure cannot do it alone. But if we are open to suggest and write a letter bravely to our government leaders, that would be useful. And actually, that's what I did. And lastly, because we're an island archipelago, right? We've been shipping produce from Jensan all the way, Maguindanao since March. And also, when the flights reopened, we've been flying produce from Davao through by Cebu Pacific. So it's also a matter of collaboration. I always believe in this time of crisis, collaboration is key. We work with fellow business people on how to actually help the farmers, but at the same time, really have strong connection in the ground so that, everything can be eased up, because the quarantine and actually what is more difficult are the checkpoints. The checkpoints somehow are unfriendly. So if you have local contacts and local friends, you can survive, in this situation.
Okay. A question now for Dr. Dairit. Thank you for that, eye opener. In September, around September, Dr. Dairit, you were asked how you rated our COVID response efforts, and you gave us the country a rating, if I recall, of 75%. My question is that the same? Would you give that same rating now, 1 month later? If not, has it improved? And if not, what else needs to be done aside from what you have suggested?
I think we have improved a lot. And I know this because I'm in touch with the work that's being done by the private sector with government. So there is an effort to improve the systems. For example, our data systems are much, much better now. Okay, we were able to, as I said, build testing capacity, but we're lagging behind in some of the pandemic functions like quarantine and isolation. What really needs to happen now is that we have to make sure that on the ground, particularly at the level of LGUs, we have a very strong capacity. And the LGUs have to be working together across jurisdictions. There's always a tendency organizationally to look at turf.
Right.
Okay, but really in the end, what you want is a seamless interaction. And you can only do that if you have constant communication and if there is constant assessment of what's going on and monitoring. That's the only way. Because even if you control the epidemic in Metro Manila, if it's ramping up in the provinces, then we still have a problem. Okay, and therefore we can see now that most of the resources have been put in Metro Manila. And I know that there are many, many LGUs that they're at their wits' end of what they're going to do if in fact they encounter a COVID case. Some of them don't have the trained personnel. And therefore we have to find ways in which these LGUs that don't have the wherewithal, they have to be identified, and there has to be a way of being able to support them. So given, our, how would you call it, where we were coming from, given the level of our resources, given the challenges, I think we've acquitted ourselves well enough that we've been able to dampen even cases in NCR. But the fight is far from over. And anytime, like in Europe now, it's spiking. Anytime it could hit us again. And you see that there are epidemiologic considerations here. For example, the virus mutates. And one of the reasons they think that in Thailand, they didn't have such a huge epidemic was because the more contagious variant of the virus was not able to come in. This is the variant that is labeled D614G. Okay, there was a change in the genetic composition of the virus, and it became much, much more contagious. And that is the variant that entered the Philippines, much, much more contagious. It's more contagious than the Wuhan virus. So all of these things are in the mix, okay? The biology of the virus, the pandemic functions that are being implemented by government and private sector, the behavior of the population, all of that is in the mix. And we have to manage given all of that. And as I said, try to achieve those goals that are very, very quantitative.
So without putting you on the spot, has the 75 increased to a greater number?
The 75, yeah, I'll give a 78.
That's not much improvement. Anyway,
Well, look at it this way. We're still at new cases of about 2,600 a day.
yeah. Okay.
If we were doing cases of 100 per day, then maybe 95%. And nandun pa tayo eh. We're still at that level eh. Although a lot of that, and that plus 3% is because NCR is now down to about 40% contribution to that total. Before it was 55%.
Okay.
Okay, so there is improvement.
Thank you.
And I think, well, okay, I'll stop there.
Yeah. Anyways, I just like to ask, kind of close to ending, in fact, past ending, but maybe for all the panelists, if Senator Ralph is still around, can you just give a few words about what you think would be the most immediate measure that government should do to ensure a seamless execution of the economic recovery program? Senator Ralph, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. I don't know about seamless execution, right? Nevertheless, I think the three bills I mentioned earlier need utmost attention and priority, and possibly its passage as soon as possible. No, of course, it's the executive who will implement all of this. No, but let me comment on a few points raised by former Secretary Deirit. No, he is very much correct in saying that the LGU should step up to the plate. Unfortunately, the budget of the LGUs, 40% is already allocated to health. Okay. Insofar as the budget next year is concerned, the budget for health next year is even way below what you have currently. Second, there is not much in the budget next year for health facilities enhancement. Okay, assisting our LGUs as well, no, yung mga improving our hospitals at the local level. Okay, that's where the big problem is, no. In fact, you can trace all of this back to whether or not, and I think we have to decide sooner rather than later, on the role of LGUs or the national government insofar as health is concerned. Should we devolve health? Should the national government take it back? Okay, and if we were to devolve it, then we have to devolve additional resources as well. Okay, I just wanted to add that.
Thank you for that clarification, sir. Okay. Dr. Pernia, then Cherry, and Dr. Deirit, just a few last words, please, before we end.
Yeah. Well, I just want to reiterate that I think we have been rather too parsimonious in our COVID response spending because it matters, especially if the spending is put to good use. Of course, it has to be put to good use. And that's very important. So, for example, Bayanihan to 165 billion, it's just it's only about $4 billion, and so that's really still very far from doubling our spending from say 5% now of GDP to 10%. We need another trillion, and but as I've said, it has to be well spent. And I think the budget for 2021, I think the problem now, I think it would have been better if we had a special allocation for COVID. Parang ma-isolate yung or ma-distinguish yung what is needed for COVID to address the health system capacity as well as the capacity of the economy to recover. That should have been there. And I think the increase in the budget compared with 2021 versus this year is not really much. I think it's about 6% increase only. And so, and this is an unusual year. I mean, 2020 was, of course, an unusual year. 2021 will also be an unusual year. It's not like other years. And so there should have been a special budget for, just devoted to this pandemic problem, which is hurting the economy, which is hurting our health system capacity.
Okay, thank you, sir. Carrie, please, in brief.
Yeah, I want to segue to Secretary Pernia because we have very low investment and a very low spending. Hopefully, we'll increase our spending, but more on investing. I want to speak up again on our farmers that we will continue, producing more for our country. And then second one for micro, small, medium enterprises, to actually save them from laying off people or eventually closure of their businesses. And for the agriculture sector, hopefully the budget for the agriculture sector will increase. But let's create an integrity mechanism that somehow, graft and corruption will not happen on the lower level, because that has been the cry of so many farmers now. There's always a budget, but they don't taste that budget, and somehow it just evaporates without them planting one cropping season. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sherry. And finally, Dr. Dairit, some last words, please.
Just very briefly, I just want to say that despite looking at the big picture and saying that we're lacking resources, I'd say that use whatever resources we have to the fullest. When I was Secretary of Health, we had a budget of 10 billion. That was in 2001 to 2005. About 10 years later, the budget of the Department of Health was about 120 billion. Okay? Now the thing is, that huge increase in budget, but you didn't seem to be seeing the commensurate outcomes.
Yeah.
So it's using the money that you have properly. That's the important thing. And that's an issue of management. That's an issue of transparency. That's an issue of competence. And I mean, even if we had just so much, if we were to spend the 165 billion well, I think there'd be a huge change. So use the money wisely, whatever money we have.
Okay. Thank you very much to all the panelists. I think we've heard the non-government sector's thinking, and hopefully Senator Recto, among others, can bring these concerns also and suggestions to the rest of his colleagues. So I'd like to thank everyone for a very interesting panel. Thank you for your insights. We did have more questions from the chat, but which we will send to the participants, the panelists, for them to answer. And we will provide the responses to our members who have asked and the participants. Thank you very much. So Anna, you take over.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Recto, Dr. Pernia, Dr. Dairit, and Ms. Adelano, and of course, Ms. Boots Garcia for that panel discussion. To formally close the program, may I call on the President of SharePHIL, President and CEO of Ortigas Land, Mr. Jimmy Ismail.
Thank you, Anna. Ladies and gentlemen, we have all seen and felt the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, which continue to wreak havoc on the economy and the lives of people. A coordinated response from all sectors is necessary to effectively neutralize its ill effects and bring the economy back towards the path to economic recovery. The government, through the combined efforts of the legislative and executive branches, has outlined a comprehensive economic recovery plan along many fronts, alongside the efforts of the private sector to bring their respective businesses back in shape. These have been the subject of SharePHIL Summit series this year, which were meant to inform and hopefully influence and trigger action towards a coordinated response to the economic crisis. The key to the success of these plans is execution, which requires a concerted effort by all implementing bodies in partnership with all of the key stakeholders. We look forward to seeing all these good ideas and plans implemented with dispatch to get us back on track towards the road to economic recovery. We hope you found today's summit fruitful and insightful. And on behalf of the Board of Trustees of the Shareholders Association of the Philippines, I would like to thank our keynote speaker, the Honorable Senator Ralph Recto, our panelists, former NEDA Secretary, Dr. Ernesto Pernia, Ms. Cherry Atilano, President and CEO of Agrea, and former Health Secretary, Dr. Manuel Dairit, our moderator, SharePHIL Vice President and Trustee, Butz Garcia, SharePHIL Chair, Mon Fernandez, and SharePHIL Trustee, Tammy Lipana, for gracing us with their presence and participating in the summit. I would also like to thank our corporate sponsors again, Ligaya Management Corporation, the Management Association of the Philippines, Accra Law, Paul Financial, Maynilad, Ortigas Land, and Dusit Tani Hotel for their support. And of course, special thanks to our media partners, ANC, Business World, and Philippine Star for covering the event, and to our partner organizations for promoting the event to their members. Again, thank you all for participating in today's summit. Have a pleasant afternoon to everyone. Thank you.